Hi, Graham.
Hi, Kim. How are you doing?
Thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me and for also being on my show since we're simulcasting. This is really cool.
Yeah, we're simulcasting. We're trying this out for the first time.
I don't know. Maybe YouTube will shut us down because we're doing too much of this together, or I don't know what is going to happen.
You better not get me demonetized, Graham. Are you going to get me demonetized? Am I next? I see how this this is going. I'm next. Okay.
I don't know. I might be bad news to have on your show.
Yeah. So those of you watching, Graham has been demonetized. I mentioned this. February 3rd was kind of this slaughterhouse day that was on YouTube. And they just went through and they went and demonetized maybe 24 channels. And I tried to figure out what the common denominator was. I think I figured out the common denominator. I think it was talking about election stuff. I have to be careful with the words because I'm afraid. But I guess talking about talking about the election and kind of exploring what happened with the election. And even though you were very much, Graham, somebody who was like, you were saying, no, there was no election fraud or anything like that, you still ended up getting hit. I think maybe it's because you brought people on your show who shared their point of view. Did you do that? Did you bring people on your show or did you go on others?
Well, I brought people on my show. I don't know. The election fraud, you and I talked about that on the phone, that seems like a very common denominator with a lot of shows. There were several things that happened leading up. I mean, first of all of us indie media people have had videos get demonetized. I mean, for years I've been doing my show for 4 years now. And for the last 2 or 3 years, I've had any video about Yemen or Syria or anything like that, they would at least limit the ads at the very least, or just sometimes pull the ads altogether on that specific video. But then I had last April, I had a live stream, they just cut it on me. And then Lee Camp and I do this show called Government Secrets. And I live stream it on my channel, and then we each put the video on our respective YouTube channels, and we were doing a 3-part series on the JFK assassination. And after part 1 on Lee's channel, there was this like disclaimer underneath it saying something like fact verification. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, Lee Harvey Oswald is the assumed killer of JFK. And Lee sent that to me, and I was like, wait, so the most debated, controversial assassination of the last 100 years, now, according to YouTube, it's Lee Harvey Oswald, no ifs, ands, or buts. Like, that's just done. So we've just settled that. And I was like, okay.
And everybody talks about that conspiracy. I mean, that is a common conspiracy to be discussing, is who really did it with JFK, right?
It's a gateway conspiracy.
Yeah. So for them to even put the fact check disclaimer on that is so odd. It's like, I mean, are they going to be doing that on religious channels? Are they going to say fact check, there's no evidence of a God? Fact check, there's, there were definitely weapons of mass destruction because the CIA said so. I mean, where does this lead? And it's been really, really frightening. I mean, on Facebook in particular, I've been getting a lot of alerts on my Facebook page saying that I've gone against community standards, right? And it lets me look at the post. And one of the posts recently that they said went against community guidelines, all I did was I said, everybody should read this article. And the article was, I said, everybody should read this article written by a Yale epidemiologist. That's all I said. A Yale epidemiologist wrote the article, and they said it was banned. And so they took it down from my page, said it went against, and cited me for written by a Yale epidemiologist about epidemiology. So very odd, that they, epidemiologists with others. Although there's many epidemiologists that agree with that epidemiologist, right? I mean, there's science, so people are there's dispute. There's that's why you get second opinions with doctors. That's why scientists have different, they come up with different conclusions and different theories and whatnot. But that's not allowed anymore these days, apparently. Well, and I'm not allowed to share an article from an expert, actually.
That's what's so scary, Kim, because going back, so not only those things that I listed, but then as you stated, I had the Convo Couch on my show on 2 occasions. Now, I like and respect the Convo Couch, but I just flat out did not agree with their claims that the election was rigged in Joe Biden's favor. And I had them on my show to debate them. Like, I had them on my show to say, I don't, and refuted their claims and tried to poke holes in it and said, you know, I love you guys, but I think you're on the wrong side of this. This is just Russiagate 2.0. And then the day of the Capitol siege and the day after, I had Convo Couch on the show. Because again, I was just looking for anybody that was there with a live feed. That's all I was looking to just talk to somebody. I was trying to get a hold of Jordan. Sheridan wasn't there, but his cameraman was. So I was trying to get a hold of Jordan Sheridan's cameraman, and I got a hold of Jason Burmis. And then I got a hold of the Convo Couch on the day that it happened, the 6th. And then on the 7th, I had Jason Burmis on. And they were just telling me what they saw. And they were saying, and we even got into some debate a little bit. They're like, well, not everyone was bad. I go, no, not every Trump supporter is a neo-Nazi, but there was neo-Nazis there committing crimes. I'm not a Trump supporter. If you watch my show, I don't have 2 good words to say about the guy. And yet this is what's so dangerous. And when the Capitol thing happened, I went, oh man, what happened at the Capitol was awful. But they're going to use it as an excuse. First, they went after the right-wing shows. And then, as you said, February 3rd, I got hit the 1st of February, but by the 3rd, that was Monday. By Wednesday, there was a dozen more shows, as you stated. Yeah. And I said, this is the problem, is because everything illegal that happened at the Capitol, there's already laws on the books. The DOJ and the FBI are prosecuting people as well they should. And you know, it's the law's already there. What's protected speech and what isn't? If you say, I don't like the government, that's protected. If you say, hey, everybody go get a gun, go to the Capitol, you can't say that. That's not protected. So all that investigation is being done, but they're just using it as an excuse for Patriot Act 2.0 and what they're getting us all to do. And this started with the demonetization is we all start self-censoring. Ooh, I don't want to put that in the title, or I should pull that video down, and it's like, it's really scary. It's why a year and a half ago, I really started putting all my videos on Rockfin. I know you're on Rockfin, and I think we need these like backup plans because big tech, it's clear. Now anyone that's critical of Biden, I mean, Jimmy Dore just had Max Blumenthal on earlier today and just asking questions about the vaccine. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not an anti-masker. I think COVID is real, but we're not even allowed to ask questions about vaccines and who's involved with them and the profit motive. And I'm going to take the vaccine eventually, but so we can't even ask those questions now. This is what's scary. Right.
Yeah. We're becoming a one narrative nation where you're only allowed to think the narrative that is state sponsored. And if you think anything or ask questions beyond that state-sponsored narrative, then you're immediately labeled misinformation, disinformation, fake news, censored, deplatformed, ostracized, blacklisted, whatever you want to say. And, you know, is it against the First Amendment? I think there's a little debate on that when it comes to big tech. But, you know, ultimately, if you say, no, it's not against the First Amendment, fine. You know, you're still able to speak and there's no government retribution, I suppose. But as a free society, we shouldn't be okay with it on a cultural level. On a cultural level, we should reject this and say, as a society that wants to be free and wants to remain free, that we do not want to become a one narrative nation of state-sponsored propaganda, and that's it. And any questions beyond that, because look, you know, they're wrong a lot. And now we're not going to be able to question any of the narratives. I mean, I wonder where will this go? And I do think it will go into places like, similar to the weapons of mass destruction situation. I do think that it will be when the CIA, when the intelligence communities and all the Democrats say so, then that's what it is. And that we're not allowed to question whatever that narrative is. We're not allowed to say, I don't know if there's weapons of mass destruction. I don't think there are, you know, and maybe we should listen to this other government entity over, you know, this other country or these other people that are saying there isn't, you know, and it just doesn't seem like we're going to be able to do that. You know, people want to, you know, it started off with just, and I think a lot of people now, I know I wasn't one of these people, and I don't think you were either. there, when it started with like Milo Yiannopoulos and Alex Jones, I think a lot of people were just like, well, yeah, but it's Milo and it's Alex or it's David Duke or it's whoever these people are, right? And it's like a matter of time before it just starts seeping into other layers, and it has. And I don't think it stops here, actually. And that's what I find so scary about this, is I don't think it stops here. I think it does go into anything against the state-sponsored narrative is going to be labeled misinformation. And that is a lot of stuff that we now know for fact was misinformation coming from the state.
Well, that's the thing. You bring up great points, because like, I remember when they did that to Alex Jones and Milo, I was like, why? I go, I've never watched Alex Jones. He's nuts.
Right.
I think he's crazy. Right. I don't want to watch him. And I know I don't subscribe. I don't like, because those things help his algorithm. I don't want to support his show any way, shape, or form, but he has the right to say whatever crazy theories he wants. Again, it's real clear. Protected speech and unprotected speech is very clear. If you say, go grab a gun and kill this group, that's against the law. The law's already on the books, but you can say whatever you want. I should be able to say, oh, I think most Trump supporters are a bunch of racist hillbillies. Is that, am I not allowed to say that? Like, and Trump, look, you want to pull the commander in chief off of Twitter because you're making a legitimate claim that he's saying Rocket Man, talking about World War III. You could say that's dangerous, but just right wingers, they should be able to say whatever. And then shutting down all of Parler. That's ridiculous. Yeah. That's like, don't go on it. It's
really gone. I mean, it really has. And the worst part about it is that I shared on my Facebook friend page today, the fact that my fan page that this post, the Yale epidemiologist post, was taken down. And I shared that on my friend's page. And the alarming thing to me is how many people, I have a lot of people on my page that are very much mainstream establishment Democrat voter types. And it's amazing to me how many of them come out of the woodwork to say, yeah, but that's because they were spreading misinformation. That's because what their claims were refuted by a peer-reviewed study. And it's like, so what? So are we saying that I'm not allowed to see anything that hasn't been how do we know which studies to choose that are peer-reviewed? Because a lot of them have different information that is contradictory. What do we do? I mean, so I think what's really alarming to me is the fact that so many people are defending this censorship. So many of them are for it. They're championing it still after they're saying how it's gone really far.
This is why it's scary. The neoliberal is, as in some ways, I mean, look, the gun-toting white nationalists, some of whom went to the White House, that's a scary group. I'm not saying those people showing up with Camp Auschwitz shirts. That's scary, man. That's like Germany in the 30s. That's not a small thing. But the people that are just conservatives, that are just wearing a Make America Great Again hat, they have the right to say that. And what's scary is, and the people on the left saying it was misinformation. Okay, well then maybe we should deplatform Rachel Maddow for her 4 years of Russiagating that has been refuted by Aaron Matei. I mean,
well, no, that's now state-sponsored misinformation. So we're allowed to hear all about how Trump was a Putin puppet, and they never found any sort of collusion between him and Russia. Did Russia influence our election by buying some Facebook ads? Sure. But beyond that, they didn't find anything else. And so you would think that they would put a fact check on Rachel Maddow's show. That says fact check. There was never any information. No collusion was ever found. Robert Mueller concluded no collusion.
None. I mean, Putin did, they should have just put a fact check thing there. Putin and Jill Stein did not prevent Hillary's blockade from campaigning in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. They should have put that on there. Just Hillary ran a horrible campaign. But it was the same thing. Remember, you couldn't even ask. Remember, Jimmy Dore just asked a question about how Seth Rich died. Just asking what happened. He was attacked. Oh, he's smeared. He's a whatever. And the thing that's scary is you see how. So I did the video with the Convo Couch from like a year or two ago talking about how QAnon is a psyop. YouTube just pulled that video down. I just got a text from Post at the Convo Couch, right? So. And this is what they're doing. You're seeing how they're controlling it. So now, anything that you bring up, they'll just say, oh, you're a QAnon nut job. So wait a minute. The flight logs that show Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton on Epstein's plane, Ghislaine Maxwell at their daughter's wedding. You're a QAnon. Sorry, go to sleep. Don't go away. They're just shutting anything down. You know, I'm not sitting there saying, "Oh, they drink virgin's blood." I'm not saying that. I'm talking about, again, peer-reviewed facts. These are flight logs. I didn't make up these flight logs. They're out there. They're matters of public record. You know, so this is what is really scary. And the fact that the left, well, they're not the left. They're just neoliberals. They're just wealthy, you know, college educated brunch goers that want to shut down anything that makes them uncomfortable because they don't want to. They're the ones that get mad when you say, you know, Obama and Biden dropped more bombs than Bush. I mean, right. They attack people like you and I because we go after Biden. You know,
well, I'm apparently a right winger. I don't know if you know this, but
right. Yeah, I know.
I'm far right. Apparently I'm far right.
You're far right. And
according to all, you know, that's so fascinating to me. The whole concept of right, left, liberal, conservative. What do you, you know, what is your definition of left and right? It's to me, everything has shifted so much that I don't even know what, you know, when people get mad at me when I say the left, you know, how you just corrected yourself and said neoliberals, but then others will say, no, they're not liberal at all. You know, they're actually authoritative, controlling.
Sure.
And so, right, they're not liberal. And then we say, well, they're the left. And then, oh, no. Then people say they're not the left. They're definitely not on the left. They're more on the right. So what do you think your definition? How do you define left and liberal?
Well, yeah, that's a great point. And I think because the true left, so I call myself an anti-war, pro-labor socialist because I used to call myself a liberal and I don't want to be associated with those folks anymore. Even up until I used to say progressive, but even that got hijacked in the Democratic primary. Right. When, like, you know, Beto O'Rourke and Liz Warren are like, we're progressives. I was like, oh boy. So that's how I define it, is the true left is like socialist, like Medicare for all, $15 an hour minimum wage, cutting the military budget, student debt forgiveness, like these verifiable policy platforms, anti-war. You have to be anti-war. So you have to be for a Green New Deal. Not, oh, we're back in the Paris Accord or whatever Mickey Mouse nonsense Biden's going to do. That's policy that should have been done 40 years ago. And part of the reason why there's all this like squabbling is there is no real home for us. We're politically homeless because the Republican Party has gone so far to the right. They're like almost a neo-fascist organization. And the Democratic Party is now basically the Republican Party of 30 years ago. I mean, Joe Biden is a Republican. I mean, he would have been fine in Reagan's party in the 80s. I mean, and that's, you know, they're for war, they're for fracking, they're for all this other stuff. And so to me, I have to just be really clearly defining who I am. And I say this now very, very plainly. I am an anti-war, pro-labor socialist. Yeah, I don't, you know, I guess for me, I struggle with this whole term of left and right. Because really where it even came from, you know, where it came from was just who sat in the chamber. I think it was in France. Right. And which political party sat on the right side of the chamber and which political party sat on the left side of the chamber. And so then they would just say, okay, these are the right and this, you know, the right says this and the left says this. And, you know, what's interesting though, is that from country to country, the alignments of who would have aligned with the left in France in that original time era and the right in France, you know, that even shifted. Like a lot of people say, for example, that now I'm going to get into real murky territory here, but a lot of people say that, you know, like Nazis, like, Nazi Germany and like Mussolini, that the fascists, right? So the fascism comes from the right. But actually, when you study history, back in Italy and in Germany during those days, they didn't really have a right-wing party by our definitions of what we would consider right-wing. Because for us, right-wing is like, you know, I would say just deregulating everything, right? Like deregulating,
just not having really any programs. It's like to each their own, right?
Right.
Like full on, just go out there and survive. Best of luck to you. Right. Like, we don't know nothing for the people. Like you're on your own. Freedom is the name of the game. And that's it. It's, and this is the Hunger Games now. So the right, back in those eras with Italy and Germany, there actually wasn't that type of right-wing party. They had socialists that called, the parties that called themselves socialist, and then they had communist, actually. So for them, left-wing parties in those countries were actually communist. Mm-hmm. And to the right of them were those who were not wanting to go as far as communism, and those were the fascists. And Mussolini was actually the one who coined the term fascism, and it had nothing to do with racism, actually, because Mussolini didn't have that in his party at all. For him, it was nationalism, Italian pride, Italian nationalism. And then Hitler, of course, took it into a different direction of racism. But the fascists actually were, by today's standards, maybe more left wing than our modern day right wing parties, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and if you read Chris Hedges' Death of the Liberal Class, he talks about how it was a lot of like the sort of liberal elites in Germany in the late 20s and 30s that allowed, Hitler to come to power. And in this country, why there's this whole like left, right, I think part of it is it's used really by the ruling class to keep us divided, distracted, and afraid. They want us fighting red state, blue state. Like they did a great job of like, oh, the Republican states are handling COVID this way, and the Democratic states are handling COVID that way, to somehow to also give us this delusion that there was such a drastic difference between these two old white rapists running for power. I just think what America really needs to wake up to is we are in class warfare. There is the 1%.
Class warfare for sure.
And they are crushing us. And this is the thing we need to get unified on. And that's why they want to keep us divided as much as they can.
Right. So that's why, to me, I would classify right wing as being more for, it is like free. It is like no regulation. But then, people that are watching this who are more on the right are going to say, no, that's not what right wing is. This is why these terms are so interesting, because it just seems like none of us really can agree on them. But it seems to me like right wing would be more deregulation and allowing corporations to just run amok, right? And the left would be more about constraining that and trying to have a society that's built more around citizens and less around kind of corporate monetary profits, which I think you have to have both. I mean, for me, I feel like balance is key in every way. I think balance is really, really a key factor. But so if I looked at it from that perspective, if I were to say left wing left would be more for the people and right would be more for corporations, I do think the Democratic Party in some ways would qualify as more right wing than Republicans, actually.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the Democratic Party is a joke. I mean, it hasn't. You're honestly trying to tell me that the person that dropped out before Iowa and the guy that came in 4th place or 5th place or whatever, these are now the president and the vice president. I mean, this is the two people, Biden and Harris, the two people that took the most corporate money. Oh, what a wacky coincidence that they suddenly ascended to the White House. Weird.
And Pete Buttigieg, remember that one. I kept saying during the election, I was like, watch out for Pete Buttigieg. He's one to watch. And sure enough, I knew Kamala was the one that was anointed. And then when Tulsi took her out, they started pivoting to Buttigieg and they wanted him. And lo and behold, Biden, their main choice actually finally gets in, does ultimately somehow pull it off. And yet in his cabinet, you've got Kamala Harris as vice and Pete Buttigieg, right? Where does this guy come from? And why not Beto? I was thinking about this, Beto during the whole thing that was going on in Texas, the big storms, and Beto was actually organizing, trying to get help for the people while Ted Cruz was trying to take a trip down to Cancun. And Beto was actually, and I wasn't a real big fan of Beto's, but I am a fan of what he was doing for Texans, what he was attempting to do for Texans during the crisis. And he was trying to rally people together, and he was trying to get help where help was needed. And he was doing his best really to use his platform and use his voice and use his power, what he has, and he's not even in office. He's not even in office. Mm-hmm. And I sat there and I was watching what was going on with Beto, and I thought, why, this is how how the establishment runs. The fact that they put Pete Buttigieg in the cabinet and they didn't give a cabinet position to Beto instead. I mean, Beto has actual government experience in Washington. Pete Buttigieg he was a mayor of a tiny town in Indiana. And Beto actually was at least a congressman from Texas, representing. And so it was just so odd. It just goes to show that it does come down to the corporate donors. It does come down to who they've anointed and who they've wanted, who they want to, to be the next round. And they just skip over people who are genuinely the leaders we need in the moments that we need them. And again, I'm not the biggest fan of Beto and his policies, but I am a big fan of what he was doing for Texans during this crisis. And it showed real leadership.
Well, yeah, and it's rare. We don't get much leadership now. And what happened in Texas is just brutal. And I'm hoping that Americans are waking up to the fact that we don't even have a society. The whole point, and this pandemic really revealed it. I remember you and I talked about this when it first hit like a year ago, about it was like we live in a banana republic. Like we're not even like, we're barely taking care of our citizens. And what happened in Texas is just more of an example of like, there's no society here. And people can say, oh, that's, Texas got rid of federal regulation back in the 30s. That's a big reason for that. But this privatization and deregulation is happening all over the country. And we don't have a society for the people. We're not thinking about our whole society. It's a handful of people, the 1%, get all the money and all the power. And people are literally left in the cold, boiling water. I mean, this is just like I'm
with no electricity.
Electricity.
They're told to boil water, and it's like, really, with what electricity? I mean, it's just so ridiculous. If you
didn't have natural gas in your home, you couldn't boil water. You had no choices. And so it's like, and you're seeing the fires that have started because people have tried to keep their homes warm, unfortunately, and people have passed away. It's been awful. So I'm really hoping people realize that this isn't a right-left issue. This is class warfare, and the ruling class owns both parties. They own the media, they own the courts, and the people need to unify and rise up because, I mean, if you were in another country right now, Kim, and you just watched the last year of what happened at Texas, what happened at the Capitol, what happened in California during the fires, the mishandling of COVID. We've got the highest COVID rate and death numbers of anywhere in the world. And the police brutality of the protests last summer, you'd go, well, this is a collapsing empire, right? Like this is what every collapsing empire looks like. I mean,
well, I think that's what people are thinking. I think people around the world are, a lot of my friends that are around the world are, they message me and they say, Kim, what is going on over there? What is going on?
Yeah.
What is happening with America? And it really is, I think this is the one thing that I sort of wish, when I do talk to people who are what I would consider on the right, where they really, they think government is the problem. And I agree with them in some ways. I do think that there's such a thing as overreach with government and too much government. Again, I'm a big person on balance. But I'm not a centrist. I want to make that clear. I'm not necessarily, it depends on your definition of centrist, I guess, but not the centrist in the negative connotation that people use when they say centrist. But I would say I'm a radical. I'm like a radical I'm a, radical that wants balance, right? But I want radical balance. But what I hate when I talk to people on the right is how they just really believe that the government is the problem and they want government to stay out of everything. And it's like, name a country where that has worked, because I would agree with you if you could show me an example, but you can't show me a single example of this working in any way, shape, or form. We do have, though, numerous examples of when a government when the government works for the people and when the taxes work for the people. We have numerous examples of that actually going really well for people and creating happiness in people's lives. The Nordic countries are an excellent example of this. We do have quite a few programs also in Europe that do really well, but the Nordic countries do really, really well with this. And they show that it not only does not stifle innovation. I mean, hello, IKEA, right? Really rich IKEA ASOS is very rich. You know, there's a lot of really, really rich Scandinavians. And actually now I was looking at it's some index of innovation. It was the World Innovation Index of which countries innovate the most and have the most patents per capita and are creating the coolest gadgets or whatever. And actually the Nordic countries came in at first this year. I mean, they came in number one. And people always think, well, you know, because we don't hear much about them, you know, except now we've been hearing a lot about Sweden. But beyond that, we don't really hear much about those Nordic countries. They kind of keep to themselves and in the cold. But, you know, it's like we can name numerous examples of governments and taxes working for the people that works really, really well. We can't find a single example of a society where government just stays out of things and it works really well. The only countries I can think of that operate that way operate in a state of constant, like tribal anarchy, right? So in Africa, where you've got tribe leaders coming around and then taking over, and then the next tribe, you know, it's just kind of for every man for themselves a bit. And you just better hope you align with whichever group is coming around and going to wield power.
Oh, it's
on each given day. And you don't even know what tomorrow brings, right?
It's
chaos.
I mean, when people say we need the government out of that, I'm always say, did you say that when you were driving on a nicely paved road that tax dollars paid for, or when did you say that? And then, you know, you bring up great points of listing all these Scandinavian countries and European countries, and they also have great quality of life indexes. They have low, you know, infant mortality rates and all this stuff. And we have high infant mortality for industrialized countries. I mean, we have all these awful numbers, you know, in all these categories. We don't have a great way of life here. This is my life is not better than it was 20 years ago. It's not. Yeah. I mean, I lost my home. It's harder to make money. I just been demonetized. There's no way. And most Americans are going to tell you it hasn't gotten better in 20 years because everything's and these countries that are just like, wait, you have to pay for healthcare? They're just like, what? I got my master's degree and it was free. They're like, what are you talking about? You know, I had a lung removed and I paid $100, you know, and they're just like, they're just, you know, so we do need a government, provided it's a poorly run government. Sure. I see the need of like, well, then I don't want a government. But if it was run correctly, the way it was supposed to be run, the way the founding fathers created it to be run, and then if the tax distribution was democratic, what democratic socialism is, and they've done a fine job of propagandizing Americans ever since World War II to equate socialism with totalitarian era Stalin communism, where it's like, oh, socialism, we're going to be in bread lines. It's like, no, just means workers own the means of production. Two socialist stores can be competitive. They can make a profit. The owner of that company can have a decent salary. They're just not making $1 million a year while their employees get $8 an hour. That's the difference. And what kind of a society do we want to have where people die because they don't have health care, where there's tent cities, where there's people dying because they don't have electricity in a storm? I mean, this is just like we're stacking up bodies during a pandemic. You know, we're seeing all the awful stuff that Cuomo, I mean, just like a for-profit healthcare system. Like, we have the money. We're the richest country in the history of the world. We could have this amazing society. Imagine if, and again, so housing first, like Finland had a really bad homeless problem about 10 years ago. And the beds for shelter, that wasn't working. And they started this homeless first program where they took people and put them in homes, not a shelter with a cot, like a studio or 1-bedroom apartment. They got them job training. They got them drug treatment. They took care of them, and they had an 80% success rate. And it was cheaper than the system that we still use in America of housing shelters and cops and all this other stuff. So it's like,
interestingly, Utah did something similar to that too. They were the first state in the union to say that they were going to end homelessness, and they gave them homes and social workers and healthcare and services. And they found it was way cheaper to do that than to continue the cycle of them being homeless. And, you know, it's interesting because Utah is such a Republican state, but they said it's unconscionable to let people live on the street like this, and we just can't do it. And so they agreed, they voted to end homelessness and, you know, spend their tax dollars on it. And it worked out really well. I mean, they haven't ended there's sort of transient homelessness
Sure.
where sometimes somebody finds themselves homeless for a minute, but they're not chronically homeless. But they did, I think, do a really good job of ending chronic homelessness.
And look, in Los Angeles, the tent cities are unbelievable. And look,
yeah, it's terrible.
It not only does the Housing First program that they've done in Finland and Utah, not only does it save money, taxpayer dollars, it also, look, tent cities and crime and people putting garbage on the streets and going to the bathroom, that's bad for everybody's property values.
Right.
That's bad for businesses. Just from an economic standpoint.
Yeah,
like,
I always say that to people, like when it comes to healthcare, and they don't want some sort of single payer or universal healthcare system. And they're like, nah, I don't want that. And I'm always like, you have to share a grocery store with everybody. I mean, I think if we learned anything during this pandemic, it should have been that we share space with each other, whether we like it or not. And you go to the same grocery store, you're picking up the same fruits and vegetables from the same bins. Your kids are going to school with their kids. Like you're living in a society and we're intermixing. And so there's really no way to avoid one another. And if one of us gets a contagion, then we're all going to get that contagion just by simple fact that we live in a community together. So wouldn't you want everybody to be healthy in your community and lower the risk of that contagion being even cropping up or spreading?
Yeah. And the other thing you could say to that same type of person that's like, I don't want to spend the money and how are we going to pay for it? Well, we just found out the F-35, they've wasted $1.9 trillion on the F-35. So, maybe there's some money we could have spent on healthcare.
Right.
But
yeah, I think we've got some money.
I think there's some lying around. But I always say, okay, what if we ran the fire department the way we ran our healthcare system? So your neighbor's house is on fire and the fire department shows up and says, oh, you don't have firefighters insurance. So we're just going to let this burn. And then it burns your house. Or, oh, your insurance doesn't cover the second floor. We can only put the fire out on the first floor. That's how ridiculous it is. The fire department is socialist. So's the police department. So's libraries. So's street cleaning. So if we just expand that to Medicare for all, like they've had in Europe for 70 years, I mean, it makes all of our societies better. And it actually is cheaper in the same way with the Housing First program. It's cheaper. Than our current system. And it's just like, I'm hoping people start waking up to that fact because it really we could have this amazing, beautiful society. America could be the light.
Imagine, and I think the easiest way to kind of explain this to people I found is through education, the education system. It's like, imagine if the education system was run in a way where you had to pay for your kids to go to school. So there was no public school option where you could definitely send your kids as soon as they're at the right age. For free, right? No cost to you. Imagine if we didn't have that system. So, some people would be able to afford to send their kids off to school and others wouldn't. So how intelligent or advanced do you think society could be if we're living in a community together, if only, let's say, a third of us are educated and the other 2/3 are not? I mean, how can we compete as a first world country if we have an uneducated base?
Thanks for watching, everybody. Please hit the like button, the subscribe button. Go to patreon.com/Graham Elwood and rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, where you can support the show. Also, I have a Bitcoin wallet, a Bitcoin Cash wallet, and an Ethereum wallet in the show notes. We're taking cryptocurrency. I have a Coinbase affiliation link. We're going to be getting on some other exchanges. So that's how you support the show. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. YouTube is unsubscribing us at an alarming rate. I have a PayPal button at GrahamElwood.com. I even have a Venmo at Graham-Elwood. There's a lot of ways to support our show. We are getting crushed by YouTube. We've dipped under 73,000 subscribers because of YouTube. Thanks for supporting what we do.